Hello, and thank you for joining the third live chat in our 2020 series about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. My name is Olivia Monahan, and I am the Project Director for the Fellowship Program team. I will be your moderator for today's chat. Today, I'm joined by fellows Margaret Callahan, Kanya, Brandy Huderson, and Pate, Skene. We will spend the majority of today's chat hearing from our fellows. Before we dive into the conversation, I have a few housekeeping points. The 2020 live chat series will feature one chat each month of the application season. Each chat is an opportunity for you to ask fellows your questions. You can register for one, some, or all of the chats. And if you missed our past chats, you can watch the recordings on demand. Today's topic is let's talk about the program areas. We'll hear what it's like to be a fellow in all 4 fellowship placement areas. This is a very timely topic because of the STPF application is open and will close on Friday, November 1st. We hope that after attending the live chat, you'll have a greater sense of direction when starting your application and selecting your program areas. As a reminder, the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships are an opportunity for doctoral level scientists, social scientists, and engineers to spend a year contributing their expertise to federal policy. Applicants with a master's in engineering plus 3 years of professional engineering experience are also eligible to apply. You must be a U.S. citizen and cannot be a full-time federal employee when you apply. Applicants in 2020 are applying for a position in the fellowship class that runs September 1st, 2021 to August 31st, 2022. And of course, no one knows what the world will look like in a year. A lot will continue to change between now and then. STPF is vigilant about keeping fellows and their families safe. The incoming class who is set to arrive this fall is very strong with no decline in number. For future applicants, all eligibility requirements and deadlines remain in place and can be found on our website. We will keep applicants who then become candidates, who then ultimately will become fellowship finalists, up to date through the months-long application and interview process. Positions are available in all 3 branches of the federal government: executive, legislative, and judicial, as well as the Roger Revelle Fellowship in Global Stewardship. Today, we'll hear from fellows who represent each of these placement areas. The purpose of this live chat is for you, our guests, to chat with our fellows. To that end, you can submit questions via the chat at any time by clicking the question box in your menu and typing your question there. In your message, you can indicate the person or people to whom the question is directed, if appropriate. During today's chat, we will focus on questions about the program areas. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Questions about topics outside the chat theme may be answered directly in the chat box. Now, let's do a proper introduction to the fellows joining us today. Margaret Callahan was a recent American Mathematical Society Congressional Fellow in the Office of Senator Amy Klobuchar. Currently, Margaret is an STPF Executive Branch Fellow at the U.S. Department of State, in the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations in the Office of Advanced Analytics. Brandy Huderson will soon be a second-year Executive Branch Fellow at the National Science Foundation, in the Division of Research on Learning in Formal and Informal Settings. Kanya, joining us by phone, was the most recent Roger Revelle Fellow in Global Stewardship. She spent her fellowship year at the World Bank in the Agriculture Global Practice. Pate Skene, also joining us by phone, was a Judicial Branch Fellow placed at the Federal Judicial Center in the Research Division. Thank you all for joining us today. Before I go to questions from the audience, I'd like to kick off with the first question. So today's chat is all about the STPF program areas. Can you reiterate your program area and share what surprised you most about your fellowship placement? And I will go ahead and start with Brandy, if you could please answer this question.
Hi, thank you. So I am placed at the National Science Foundation. I am in the Division of Research on Learning and Informal Learning in Science, specifically working with the AASL program, AASL standing for Advancement in Informal Science Learning. STEM learning, we've changed it to STEM. I think the thing that surprised me the most about my placement was probably the amount of support that I'm getting right now from the fellowship team. NSF has lots of experience with AAAS fellows. I walked into at least 10 or 15 fellows already there. And so I think it was 10 or 15. And so there's a lot of support already set up for us. I am a first-time fellow for my mentors. And so they've been very attentive. They don't want to screw up. I don't want to screw up. So there's a lot of communication going back and forth. There's a lot of checking in. Also the freedom that I have to kind of branch out to other programs that are going on at NSF and get involved in other things. So I have projects working with my specific program, but I also have 2 or 3 projects that I'm working on that actually are completely and totally outside of AASL. So besides the support, it's probably been the freedom, have been the things that have surprised me the most.
Great, thank you. And so Brandy is spending her time in the executive branch. I'd like to turn it over to one of our phone participants. Pate, can you tell us a little bit about what serving in the judicial branch was like?
Yes, so this is Pate by audio, and I was in the judicial branch, and my placement was in the Federal Judicial Center, and specifically the research division. So the Federal Judicial Center, not widely known outside the judicial branch, but it is a little bit analogous to the Congressional Research Office in that it is the research and education arm of the federal courts, but it is much, much, much smaller. So it's really quite a nice group. I think when I was there in the research division, there were 15 or 16 total. That was the total staff of that division. For the Federal Judicial Center, we, in the course of my year, had several all hands meetings for various purposes, and you can fit the entire FJC into a relatively small auditorium. So that was probably the biggest surprise to me as well, was that how small it was and how easily you could get to know everybody. And the flip side of that was, as a small group that does the research for the U.S. court system broadly, what good and easy access you had to all kinds of courts. It was very easy to call up someone, to call up a courthouse anywhere in the country, or send out a request and say, we're trying to research something, and people would, of course, easily talk to you. It was very fun, but also across the other branches. So there is only one judicial fellowship slot, so you might feel a little bit lonely with regard to the other AAAS fellows. That wasn't true in my case. It was very easy to talk to. I mean, I was obviously part of the program overall, but it was also easy both through the STPF program itself, contact other fellows in the executive or legislative branch, but also just contacting people, call up the Department of Justice and say, you know, I have a question, could I come and talk to you? It's really, really easy around Washington to do that.
Great, thank you, Pate. All right, I'd like to ask Margaret to talk about your experience next.
Sure, thanks so much, Olivia, and thanks for setting this up. So I think, as Olivia mentioned, I was the American Math Society Congressional Fellow for the 2017-2018 fellowship class, and now I'm an executive branch fellow. So I will try hard not to take double the amount of time to answer every question. I'm a woman of few words, so that shouldn't be an issue. So I guess I would say for the Congressional Fellowship, so I worked for Senator Amy Klobuchar in the Senate. On her legislative team, I worked on education and workforce development issues, just as some background. Mathematician by training, so did not spend a lot of time using my specific academic training in my fellowship on the Hill, but still had an amazing experience. And I think what surprised me most was the pace. And we were warned, you know, for the Congressional Fellowship, that the pace would be very fast, especially coming out of academia. It's like we would get, you know, hours, days if we were lucky to turn around a specific product. or to answer a particular request. Coming from academia, where we had like weeks or years even to think about a specific problem, this was quite the learning curve was steep to learn how to be responsive on a very short timeline to requests from the senator. But because of that pace, I ended up learning very fast and adapting very quickly, and it just had like the best time. It was a great experience. I learned so much. And then in my executive branch fellowship, which I'm currently in my second year of, which will be coming to an end, I think in the middle of October. So I work for the State Department, Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations, the Office of Advanced Analytics. So I use a little bit more of my academic background in my current role. I think what has surprised me the most is how much autonomy I've been granted. And I think that's one thing I'd recommend prospective fellows to think about when they're, thinking about applying and also choosing a placement is, if you're interested in having a lot of autonomy and ownership over your work and your portfolio, to definitely talk about that as you're exploring options, because that's been really wonderful. So I really feel fully integrated into the team at State, and I forget I'm a fellow all the time. I just feel like another member of the team. So that's been really wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Margaret. So I'm hearing a few themes here. There is the support from your mentors, from the greater office, as well as a little bit of a discussion of pace and the type of placement that you accept that might differ. I'd love to hear now from Kanya about your experience. Kanya, will you tell us more about serving as the Ravel Fellow? Kanya, if you want to check your audio settings just to make sure you're unmuted. All right, well, I'll have our tech team try to check in with Kanya and get her back online, and then we can follow up with her. So thank you so much to the fellows for talking about your experiences. I'd like to take our first question from the audience. What skills in your doctoral training do you actually use in your day-to-day work as a fellow? And what skills did you have to learn on the job as a fellow? And Margaret, you alluded to this, so I can turn to you first if you're willing.
Sure. Oh, that's such a good question. So, and again, I'll try not to be too confusing in talking about both of my different experiences, but I think actually some of the skills that I learned in my doctoral studies apply to both my work in the legislative branch and in the executive branch. And like one of the big ones is like creative problem solving. So I'm a mathematician by training, so and I think that ability to think critically and solve problems extends to every area of PhD research. So and that is a skill that is really it is assumed that you have it if you've gotten a PhD, and I think it really is true. So I definitely would say that critical thinking and problem solving are big. Communication skills is like a huge thing, and I assume that many people coming from academia have some teaching experience. So I think that has been really helpful. On both the Hill and in my current office, I regularly have to brief senior leadership. In my current role in the executive branch, often on very technical methods that we use to analyze. So in my current role, I do data analytics for conflict prevention. So we use a lot of different pretty technical methods to do our work. And so being comfortable briefing kind of difficult technical topics to senior leadership, that is something that I definitely use from my my PhD research. I think one of the things that I had to learn on the job on both the Hill and in my current role in the executive branch is sorry, I'm drawing a blank. Multitasking, that's what I was going to say. And juggling a large portfolio and like having many different types of projects all at once. So that's definitely true on the Hill. You have to be able to, at a moment's notice, just drop what you're drop what you're doing, change gears to provide something on a kind of a short fuse. And I have had in my work in the executive branch, also a very diverse portfolio. My office works on the entire world. We are not like a regionally focused office. So I have projects in both Ethiopia and also a lot of work in the Western Hemisphere. So I think learning to multitask, juggle a wide range of issues all at once, as opposed to being kind of singularly focused on a particular academic question or set of questions, that was something that I had to learn on the fly. And also not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, especially on the Hill, when you have very limited time and resources. So definitely learned the value of producing something. Not to say that you don't do your best work, but people don't expect that you spend, hours and days on a particular task. So just getting something out is important.
Yeah, certainly. We hear that often. A completely different environment than the research environment. All right, I want to check in one more time with Kanya to see if you're here with us.
Olivia, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. All right, so
Wonderful.
Kanya, I'm going to give you both of these questions. So can you reiterate your program area, the Revelle Fellowship, and what surprised you most about your fellowship placement? And then if you could tell us a little bit more about if you used your doctoral training in your day-to-day work while you were in the fellowship.
Okay. So as Olivia mentioned, I was the 2017-2018 Roger Revelle Fellow in Global Stewardship. I ended up finding a placement at the World Bank in the Office of Agriculture Global Practice, and I was based in the West Africa region. So my background is in health, but I was placed in agriculture and working on a project that was a collaboration between people working in human health and veterinary health. So it was a really nice, broadening experience from that perspective, even though I did very much use my training in understanding infectious diseases and my knowledge from my technical area. So I'd say the thing that surprised me the most was how my fellowship placement at the same time gave me such a access into this broad new world where I learned about new areas and new people working on projects. It was an extremely widening experience. But at the same time, the experience of being in DC, I was always running into fellows in different places and seeing connections between people with the same interests in different forums. So attending different talks in the area. And so that felt like sort of a small community, even though it was just such a huge new world opening to me. So sort of that dichotomy or that difference was really quite a surprise to me. And
thank you. Go ahead.
I think I answered your second question, but I did use my specific training because it was quite closely related to my PhD work.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Kanya. Brandy, could you let us know how you use your doctoral work in your day-to-day, if at all?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Margaret. Critical thinking, problem-solving skills have been key. For me, data management has been a big deal too. You're just given dumps of data and you have to figure out how to sort it, what to do with it if you want it. So the data management piece has been very helpful as well. I think in terms of skills that I've had to learn since joining, I think I've gotten a pretty good idea of what it's like, the difference between working on a team and being a collaborator. So there's lots of teamwork that happens for me in this fellowship as opposed to collaboration. And so that's something that's very different. It's learning to share initial products and not bring two separate products together at the end. And so that's been something that I've enjoyed being a part of and learning with the fellowship.
Thanks for that, Brandy. I'd like to now ask Pate the same question.
Yes, so I'll reiterate, critical thinking is ubiquitous, I think, in all of these placements. At the Federal Judicial Center, the research division, almost all of the work there involves some sort of research. Often it's empirical research. It might be surveys of what people are thinking, but then there's data analysis and the reports to write. So all of that's very much like doing has elements of what you do as a PhD project. In my particular case, my background is as a molecular biologist and neurobiologist, and I arrived on my fellowship just as there was an issue sort of handed to the courts or presented to the courts on how courts manage forensic sciences, questions about the scientific validity of those, and that became sort of a natural assignment for me. So I was doing some work on the legal research on how courts should handle that, and then eventually wrote a paper reporting that and making some recommendations. And that because it was looking at what crime labs do and what is and is not considered necessary to validate out results from those kinds of labs, that was a really natural fit. So I actually found it really enjoyable because I'd spent by that time about 25 years working in labs, that when I was talking about what crime labs did, it was very easy for me both to understand, but also to sort of translate that for the judges and the people I was writing for.
That's a difference in the work that you did to some of the other fellowship placement opportunities.
Yep.
So related, I'd like to ask this question for anyone that it is relevant for. Did you apply to other program areas, and what motivated you to select the program area that you did? With 4 program areas to select from, applicants can apply to 2. And so this might help our audience try to suss out which of those 4 to apply to. Happy to take anyone who would like to answer that.
This is Pate. I would be happy to answer that. I did apply to 2. I applied both to the judicial branch and to an executive branch fellowship, particularly interested in energy and environment. And happily was a finalist for both, and so I had to choose which direction I was going to go. It was a very happy but really hard choice. So I asked some other fellows. I asked people who I was fortunate enough to know at the law school at Duke, some people who had worked at the Federal Judicial Center, and ultimately talking to some people who had worked there. One literally told me, referred to the person who was going to be my mentor at the FJC and said, if you have a chance to work with him and you don't, you are an idiot. And I took that as a really strong recommendation, and that was what made my choice. But I really would have loved the chance to work through the executive branch in addition.
Certainly. Strong recommendation. Anyone else apply to another area or have some insight into what drove their decision?
So I didn't apply to I only applied for the executive branch, but I did so after talking to people and kind of figuring out what was the best fit for me. I was coming from, I am still technically, I'm on leave from my institution where I'm a tenure track assistant professor. And so I was thinking about what would be the most benefit for me and what would also go over well with my administration when applying for leave. And so the executive branch had more application, I think, in terms of skills and knowledge that I was going to be gaining for my institution, as opposed to telling them that I wanted to do one of the other ones and try to fit it in to my position.
Yeah. Talking with current fellows and alumni fellows, I think outside of this chat is definitely a good way forward. Margaret or Kanya, anything to add here? I see Margaret nodding.
Yeah, well, I applied to, when I did my, the congressional fellowship, I had applied to both the congressional, legislative and executive branch. And I know that I knew the congressional fellowships were a little bit harder to come by. You know, they're only like 30, I think my class had like 34, 36. So when I when I got the fellowship, I thought it would be, I spoke to actually some of the people at the American Math Society, as well as, family and friends and other former fellows that I knew, including former AMS congressional fellows, to try to make a decision. And I heard that it was a relatively common practice for congressional fellows to move on to the executive branch. So I kind of always had in my mind that that's what I would do. And I'm very lucky it worked out. It's by no means guaranteed that you'll be able to do that. But I really wanted to have both experiences. Working on the Hill made me want to see what the executive branch was like even more, because kind of the way those two branches work together. So I mean, asking to suggest one versus the other would be like picking a favorite child. They're very different experiences, but both extremely valuable, life-changing and career-changing.
Awesome. Yes, and we encourage applicants to apply also through our partner scientific societies. So Margaret was alluding to applying to 3 areas, and able to do that, you can apply through 2 program areas through AAAS, and then as many scientific societies that are relevant to your background for the legislative positions. All right, great. Kanya, do you have anything to add on this question?
So I'll say I had been watching this Revell Fellowship for a few years. So I knew it only came up certain years. So was thrilled when it came up, and was thrilled to be offered the position.
Great. Yes, we're very excited that we're going to bring on a Revell Fellow this cycle. Great. So I want to ask next of anyone who would like to answer, did you have previous policy experience? And did that influence you in any way into the program area you applied to? And if you didn't have previous policy experience, how did you make sure you made a compelling application?
Well, I can say I had no policy experience prior to this. But like I said before, I was an assistant professor of biology. And so I was working I work at a small HBCU, historically Black college or university. And we are on the receiving end of lots of policy directives or enactment. So there are lots of funds that are set aside to help small liberal arts colleges. There's lots of funding set aside to help underrepresented minorities and marginalized groups. And the thing that kept coming up in my mind all the time was, who is making these decisions? How are we deciding what's funded and what's important? Because from where I was sitting, a lot of things that were listed as important and needed and funded didn't make much sense. And so it really got me interested into thinking, who's doing this and how are we making these decisions? And that kind of pushed me to looking into this fellowship. My sister was a fellow, I think maybe 3 or 4 years before I applied. And I remember telling her, great job for you, but that's not for me. But the longer I spent in academia, the more questions I had. And this just seemed to be the logical place to go to see about getting some of those questions answered, and figuring out how, honestly, I can figure out how to influence the policy that is made. Because again, sitting in my classroom at my institution where a lot of policy kind of dead ends, or the enactment dead ends, it's just, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And sitting in academia, those aren't questions that you really have the opportunity to explore. So this allowed me to do that. It's allowed me to do that.
The fellowship is meant to be a professional development opportunity. So that I think it's a great reason to apply, to try to increase your knowledge in this area. Anybody else have insights into level of policy experience when they applied and how they fit that into their application?
Well, I'll join this Pate again. I had one particular kind. I actually had taken time and gone to law school shortly before applying for the fellowship. And so I had a law degree and applied for the Judicial Fellowship. So I had that background. I had no policy development, either legislative or administrative agency development. So in the Judicial Fellowship, Obviously, a law degree is helpful. It's not necessary, I should say, to anybody who's interested. You don't have to have a law degree to apply for or to be the judicial fellow. That can work very well. You just tailor your projects working with your mentor to the kind of work that you would do based on what your background is. In my case, I had that background. Interestingly for me, it was also a chance to develop sort of experience around Washington. And I ended up getting, through other fellows and talking to agencies, learning a little bit more about executive branch agencies. And because of where I worked, I lived in the Capitol Hill neighborhood and would meet people who worked on the Hill. So I learned a bit more, and I ended up coming back to my home institution. And since I've gotten back, I've been teaching a course for PhD students and law students on regulation, on the practical applications of regulation. So that's been one of the great sort of professional development opportunities that came directly out of my the parts of my fellowship that were not directly connected to the FJC.
Very cool. I'm sure your students love that.
I hope so. I love it.
Margaret or Kanya, anything to add here?
Yeah, I had absolutely no
Looks like we're experiencing a little bit of technical difficulties. So we'll see if we can get Margaret back online.
Sure. Like maybe I can jump in while Margaret's coming back.
Yeah.
She's back maybe.
and I think it really shouldn't deter people. I think I'm having some connection issues because I just heard myself back.
You're back online, so we didn't hear any of it because it cut out right when you started. So if you could repeat your statement, that'd be great.
Yeah, sorry about that. We're having some strange internet surges in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is where I'm located. I was just saying I have no policy experience whatsoever when I started, and that I think the goal of one of the goals of the program is to bring in people with different backgrounds. Especially Capitol Hill, completely full of people with a lot of policy experience. Anyone who would be a prospective fellow would have the ability to learn everything that they would need to know. And I think what's most important is policy interest and interest in public service and engaging on those kinds of high-level questions. But definitely not having pre-existing policy experience shouldn't deter someone from. I think it can be helpful in navigating certain aspects. And in the executive branch, politics is still important and bureaucracy. So, learning to navigate those things is, there is a learning curve there. So I think some background is useful, but definitely not a requirement.
Yep, certainly. And Kanya, you also were going to add something to the conversation.
I was going to say also, I didn't have specific policy experience that I highlighted in the application. So some things that touched on that, some community organizing and working for a political campaign as a volunteer, but nothing specifically policy. I think in my application, I sort of took the approach that Margaret is suggesting, that, I just highlighted why I was interested in it. My background, again, is in infectious diseases, but with public health as well. And so I already have that interest in population level interventions. And so I see policy as sort of analogous, applying things on a larger scale. And so that's how I would have pitched my application, that I had a genuine interest that was backed up with other work I had done, but not specifically policy.
Can I also add one more thing? So I had no experience with policy, and I don't know that I had a firm grasp on what policy actually was either. I mean, policy is a very large term. if you Google it, which is my standard thing to do, you don't really get a good answer what policy is. So I don't think that should be a deterrent either. Like, this is designed to be a learning experience from start to finish. And so even if you don't really understand what policy is, I don't think that should be something that you decide makes you unqualified for this fellowship.
I saw Margaret and myself nodding to that one. All right, great. Can you all talk a little bit about your work-life balance while in the fellowship? Margaret did allude to some of this earlier about the pace. And so even within the branches or the fellowship placements, there are nuances and differences. And so if you also have reflections on your fellows and how the pace and work-life balance works in the various areas, I would appreciate your comments.
So can I go first? Because this is the best thing for me. Coming out of academia, there is a thing such as work-life balance. And I know that now. And I may be slightly spoiled, and I don't know how I'm going to transition back. One of the things that my mentors and everybody in the building has stressed prior to the pandemic, you can leave your laptop here. You don't have to take it home with you. And I was like, well, how will I work when I get home? Well, that's the point. You're going home. I was like, oh, okay. Well, how will I answer emails? You can answer them when you come back to work, whatever day that is. Blows my mind still every day. When you log off on Friday at 4:30, you don't get another email until Monday morning, and that's standard. It's normal, and that is not the case in academia. So I have been able to find much better work-life balance here in the fellowship that I had in academia. The boundaries that exist in these different in my particular agency have been really helpful for me. I'm used to traveling on vacations with my laptop so that if a student emails me, I can answer them back. If my -80 freezer went down, I can find somebody to deal with that. When someone walks by you and we're at a deadline, this isn't the end of the world. It'll be fine. It makes you realize balance exists. It's something that you too can achieve, and that you should strive for this. And it's perfectly fine. It doesn't make you a slacker. It doesn't mean that you won't progress in your career. So these things have been very exciting for me.
I would echo what Brandy said. For the executive branch in particular, I have found a work-life balance to be highly achievable. The lines between work and life are a little bit blurred in the COVID era, working from home full time, but still, my office expects that we are, keeping a normal schedule. There is no expectation that I am working overtime. Federal employees don't, at least at state, we don't get paid overtime anyway. So on the Hill, though, I would say that that's something to talk about with your office. If you're interested in the Legislative Branch Fellowship, to make sure you discuss that with your office, because I personally had a great experience. My supervisor, the people I worked with, did not have expectations that fellows were working long hours. But other staff, congressional staffers do work long hours. They work very hard. They work all the time. And there is often an expectation for Hill staffers that they are, they have their phone and email available, at all hours of the day. So I think it's important as fellows, we're not supposed to be, have those same expectations. I think, and I did work a little extra at times when it was necessary, but in general, my office protected my work-life balance and had reasonable expectations of my time. So I think both for the legislative and executive branch fellowships, that's something to talk about when you're, pursuing different placement options.
I would say my experience was somewhat similar to that. So there were definitely ebbs and flows. When a project was had a particular stage that we needed to get ready before a trip, and there was travel involved that we had to schedule around. But overall, I was really surprised and pleased about how people talked about their families, understood that you had other things going on in your lives, and it was just for me, I guess similar to Brandy, sort of a different take on what was expected that I really appreciated. I found it again, people really hardworking, but the expectation that we all have other things in our lives, and an appreciation for that I really liked about the fellowship.
Yeah, it certainly highlights part of the placement process is kind of sussing out what the office expects of the fellow that's coming in. And so I'm hearing kind of some trails of that. And that's built into the process. And I think Pate was going to chime in as well.
I was just going to reiterate the judicial branch is very similar. People work hard, but it is a government agency, and they work much more regular hours than we're used to in academia, and probably get as much or more done. They're well adapted to that pace, and have a good sense of sort of business timing, I guess is the way I would put it, to get things done on a business schedule, and then the rest of the time is your own.
So this one is kind of carryover of our conversation, I think, about academia, but one attendee is wondering, he's worried if he leaves research to do the fellowship, that he'll be closing a door on the tenure track. Can any of the panelists speak to this concern? And how does, for example, how does the fellowship experience maybe translate back to academia? And Brandy might be able to take this one.
So I think it depends if you are already in a tenure track position or not. So before I left for the fellowship, I had a discussion with my dean about the fellowship, what skills I'd be learning, and I put it in writing, and how it would benefit my institution. And so and there's kind of an ongoing conversation about how these things translate to my tenure package as well. So I anticipate publishing while I'm at the fellowship related to the fellowship. So that goes is a part of my tenure application. I think if you are already in the tenure, if you're already in the position, it's really about communicating with your dean or your provost the benefits to the institution that this brings. This is a pretty big deal. Again, I'm from a small HBCU in DC, and so it looks good for the administration to say, oh, we had a AAAS fellow who was at NSF, right? So it's part of it is about that communication between you and your leadership. Research is always there, and there's always somebody that needs you to do research. So you may have to change locations, but there'll always be somebody that wants you to come and do some research somewhere. So I don't think it's closing the door at all. I think this is adding to your skill set. I think that thinking about what happens after you get tenure, especially seeing as how we are sitting at home right now. So lots of research is not happening. So how do you stay relevant now? And so I think the fellowship adds to your worth and to your weight in terms of your career.
Thank you. Yeah. And Pate, you also alluded to working in academia. Do you have anything to add to this conversation?
Yeah, and I think Brandy's take. I did my fellowship later. I was tenured when I went on my fellowship, and but I think what I would suggest is to think about what you want to do with what you learn on the fellowship. I think it's entirely possible to do the fellowship and learn some policy skills, get policy background, and still return to what is primarily a laboratory or research position that's now informed by the policy, what you learned about policy, or maybe you're orienting your research to address policy questions, or you want to do your research and as a complement to your main laboratory or scientific research, comment on policy implications, have a policy role. And I think those are different things, and they would have different implications for an academic career. How you change what you're doing. Are you going to branch out and have something that's more of a science and policy role, where you might have either a joint appointment or work in an area that's a science and policy area, or are you going to do primarily science with policy as an add-on. So I would agree with Brandy. If you're already in an academic position, you know, talking to your institution, the relevant people at your institution about how you envision coming back, you know, your role in the institution as you come back. And if you're somewhere else in your career and then planning to apply to academic positions, think about what kind that you'd be qualified for and what you'd be interested in, because you'll get all these skills and experiences that actually may change what you're broaden, what you're eligible for, what you're attractive for.
Very good point. Both expanding your skills and then thinking about longer term what you might see yourself doing is important. So I'd love to turn to Kanya for this question. Kanya, how has being a fellow changed your career goals or priorities at all? And if so, how?
Okay, so this sort of dovetails with the last question, which I have some thoughts on. So I left a small liberal arts college where I had sort of a lab-focused research program, and I left that and definitely felt the risk of, you know, jumping into this policy fellowship and not knowing what would come after, being open to an entirely new direction of working in policy or the potential to come back to an academic position. So I was sort of wanting to maintain, you know, those options open to me in the fellowship. And I definitely think that the selection that you make about a placement will matter. But I think even as you're going through that, you can find maybe opportunities to collaborate with people to write a paper that will be credit toward an academic career, or other ways to sort of stay engaged that are academically relevant if you want to do that. And so this has shifted my own career. So for family reasons, I've moved out to the West Coast, but I'm back in an academic position. I'm now working in policy, in a policy department though. So I'm in a public health, school of public health, but have shifted to policy. So I'm still using some of my own personal training as a PhD scientist and working with gene drive modifications of mosquitoes for infectious diseases. But now I'm looking at the angle of how do we, what policies do we need in place in order to make that happen? So I see it as a really great leveraging opportunity. I don't think that you're closing yourself off to going back to laboratory research. I think you need to think strategically about that. But I also think it's exactly that. You can leverage this into something that sort of lets you meld those two parts of yourself of being a scientist, but also having this policy interest and new skills, and that's fantastic. That's just a really great platform that this fellowship gives you.
Thanks, Kanya. Anyone else? How has being a fellow potentially changed your career goals or your priorities?
So okay. No, Mark, you should go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Oh, thanks. I would say that the fellowships have really shaped my career personally. I really had I differ from my colleagues on this panel in that I had no desire to stay in academia whatsoever. After getting my PhD, which really wasn't all that long ago, 2016, I was a visiting faculty for a year and then immediately started looking for other opportunities to use my math background to, you know, do something good for the world. And so I kind of went into the fellowship very open to having my career directed in a particular way, directed and misdirected. So I think that while I really enjoyed my time in the legislative branch, I didn't see myself necessarily staying on the Hill, in part because of the kind of the pace of things. But in my current role, I've found a really incredible balance of like the policy and kind of more technical work that the parts that I loved from academia and the policy stuff that I also have come to love. And so I'm looking to stay in my current office, when my fellowship ends in October. So I think And I'll note on that one of the things I did look for in choosing a placement in the executive branch was an office that had former fellows employed. And that's pretty hard to find at state in particular. And, you know, they've kind of cautioned against assuming you'll be able to find a job at the State Department in particular. I won't speak for other departments, although I've heard similar things about some. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you are hoping for a career shift, or as you come into your fellowship, to kind of think about that when you're exploring different offices and opportunities, because some offices have a track record of keeping their fellows on. So
certainly. So unfortunately, it seems like we're approaching the end of our time together, but I wanted to wrap up by asking you all to quickly share some parting advice to anyone applying through either STPF or through a partner society this year. Why should someone apply to your program area? Let's start with Brandy.
First off, I would say just go for it. And if you don't succeed this time, try again next year and possibly the next after that. I think the experience that I've gotten here, I would say it's invaluable, because I'm not paying for this experience. I'm not paying for the skills that I'm learning. I am technically a quantitative scientist, for example. I'm doing all qualitative work right now, but I didn't have to go back to school for this. These aren't courses that I'm having to go back and take on my own time. And the courses that I will be taking are part of the fellowship. It's a part of the development in the fellowship. So I think it's a very quick fellowship. It's only 2 years. Well, it's 1 year with the option to renew for the second. And the time goes by very fast. But I think the skills that you're getting, the experience that you're getting, it might take you 5 or 6 years and a couple $1,000s out of your own pocket to do that. And so I think that alone makes the experiences worth it. The networks that you are getting access to, people literally, you said that you're a fellow, they don't care where you were placed, what you did, or how long ago it was. Oh, you're a fellow, let's chit chat, let's talk, let's figure out how to move you forward. And so those are the type of networks that you spend a lot of time trying to be a part of, and you walk right into that, I think, with the fellowship.
Next, I'll go to Kanya. Why should somebody apply for the Roger Revelle Fellowship?
So the Revelle Fellowship is quite different. It gives you the opportunity to work in a government office, or to work anywhere in DC that's relevant to the mission of that fellowship. So looking at the connections between environment and health and sustainability. And so it really is an extraordinary opportunity to go in and find something that really fits for you. So I would highly encourage you to apply for this particular program area if that sounds of interest. I would say that if you have that position, talk to as many people as you can. I mean, I think starting that networking early and finding out all the different opportunities that are open to you. So talk to people widely. And when you're talking with people in specific offices, I would say talk to your mentor, but it's great to also talk to as many people around you in that office, so you get a sense of the culture. And in some cases, that mentor might move on and you have another. So if you have an idea of the group that you'll be working in, you'll have a better understanding if it's a good fit. And just enjoy. I mean, it's an extraordinary opening for you.
I love that. How about Pate?
The Judicial Fellowship, certainly, if you have an interest in the courts, if you have an interest in justice, the justice system, criminal or civil, it's a great fellowship. It's smaller. There's only the one fellow. It's a smaller branch of government. I would describe it as a quieter branch of government. It does important work, but it's a branch of the government that people don't often engage with or get to see. So it's to me, a wonderful opportunity if you're interested in law, in justice, and how to administer a justice system. It's a great fellowship, and then within that, whatever your skills you're bringing, The courts are involved in everything, so there is a need for people to do research within the FJC on almost any topic or bring any skill set you can imagine.
Thank you for that. So I'll just turn it to Margaret for final remarks on applying to either a partner, legislative, or to the executive branch.
Yeah, I would say if you're looking for an opportunity to more directly apply your specific technical expertise to your everyday work, I think that the executive branch is a great choice. The Legislative Fellowship is really an amazing learning experience. You get a chance to, research and help draft legislation, and you really get like it's a total crash course in how how lawmaking occurs. It's pretty amazing. So I really can't recommend either strongly enough. I think though they're very different, and if you're interested in using your kind of technical expertise, there's a lot of opportunities to do that in the executive branch, almost like no matter what your technical background is, which is pretty amazing. And I'll say I loved interview week for the executive branch because I learned like all of the things that they do in the executive branch. There's just so many amazing opportunities. So if that is something that's of interest to you, I'm continuing to more directly apply your specific academic training, I'd say the executive branch. But the legislative branch is just an experience unlike anything I'll ever have again. So it's very unique. And both are extremely interesting, fascinating, and engaging.
All right, that brings us to the end of our time. I want to thank Margaret, Brandy, Kanya, and Pate again, and thank you, our audience, for your insightful questions. The application is open through November 1st. Visit the fellowship website, AAAS.org/STPF, for details on the application. You can also learn more about this chat series and watch recordings of past chats. The next chat, The Perks of Being a Fellow, Networking, Influence, and Impact, will take place on August 20th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We hope that you can join us. If we did not answer your question today, please send us an email at fellowships@AAAS.org, shown on the slide. Thanks again for joining us.